Hello everyone, Ken and Loey here, and the next patch for Path of Exile has come out with their balance manifesto, and I have my friend Warmonger with me, and I decided that we should cover our thoughts on the spicy reductions in player quality of life, I guess.
Very spicy indeed.
Yeah. So basically, a majority of the manifesto is really heavy nerfs to a lot of mechanics to the game, especially flasks, and um, mitigation of damage. So basically, your defenses that you would get from your flasks are thrown out the window. So, but we'll get to that. There's a lot of stuff here, but I want to make clear that that me and Warmonger, especially the last two leagues, have kind of shifted on the type of player that we are for skill level as well as how much we play. So for me, I haven't really played Path of Exile consistently for the past two leagues, so around 6 months. So I'm definitely not really. I would consider myself a casual mapper. You know, like, for me, if I play a league, the main goal that I am shooting for is getting to rare corrupted tier 16 maps, and I'm fully content with that. So I'm not doing anything like super boss stuff like Uber Elder or Awakening 8 Sirius or Delirious stuff. So with that in mind, Warmonger, how about you state what kind of Path of Exile player you would say you are?
Well, I'm kind of more on the higher end of a player these days. Maybe like top 10% or something like that. I tend to do like the 36 challenges and I'll do like stuff beyond the rare corrupted tier 16 maps you're talking about, like Uber Elder runs and
Yeah.
things like that.
So essentially, we're definitely in different brackets in that regard, and you've also gotten to like level 98, I think, or higher with two or three characters this league. Is that right?
I got a 98 and a 100 this league.
Yeah. So definitely really good. My highest level is 97, and that's only because of the headhunter before they threw that in the trash bin last league. So there's that. So for the development manifesto, supposedly they're trying to reinvigorate old mechanics by trimming their power from strategies that stand too far above the rest. So let's take a look at that. So for the great support gem reduction, so basically the great support gem nerf. So overall, what they're trying to do is making it so that they're trying to cut down on the amount of power creep that has entered into the game throughout the past year or two at its core, instead of trying to let it spiral out of control as it kind of has been. But in my mind, with the headhunter nerfs as well as the aura stacking nerfs, or I guess more so cluster jewel nerfs, they kind of already dealt with like the most outstanding power creep builds, right?
For
Like,
the
can you?
most, yeah,
Yeah. So can you think of really any others that would fit that bill?
um, I don't know I don't know a lot of the meta stuff offhand. I'd have to look around to see what everyone's playing.
Okay. So with that, they're trying to encourage players to try out more utility-esque support gems rather than pure damage ones. Uh, so gems that provide a useful benefit in additional damage will grant less than 25% more damage at level 20, and those that provide only a damage bonus with very mild restriction does 30 to 35%, and then ones with major downsides do 38 to 48%. So I'm guessing that's more like brutality support and gems like that are just pure damage in one regard. So one thing that I found that was absolutely laughable was this paragraph here. A couple of existing supports have a downside added because I don't
Why
know.
not?
Allowing us to keep the damage multiplier relatively high, which is kind of a lie, actually, because if I think melee physical damage support does like 54% melee damage or physical damage. So if they're nerfing that down to 48%, they're already nerfing it. And now they're adding for melee physical damage support now deals 10% less attack speed. Like, what?
Yeah, that's just complete trash.
so I just don't understand what the deal is with that. And you have to keep in mind that physical damage support, melee physical damage support, is a very restrictive gem. Like, you can't do elemental scaling. Well, actually, can you convert melee physical damage?
I mean, I guess theoretically you can convert it, but then you don't get the more multiplier of it on the elemental stuff. So it's kind of like, it's okay, I guess. You could do that, but I think there's better options than doing that.
Okay. Yeah, so basically what I was thinking is, like, it's a gem that's pretty restrictive already. Like, you can't use it on ranged stuff that deals physical damage, for an example.
Right.
It's only melee physical. And then they add 10% less attack speed to it. Certain builds, such as Earthquake Bleed, are barely affected by this down. How is less attack speed? I mean...
And who plays Earthquake Bleed? What the crap is that?
Yeah, wouldn't people play, like, Ground Slam Bleed? Because I think Ground Slam is probably better than Earthquake, isn't it?
Probably.
Well, either way, because the damage multiplier hasn't changed, the support is almost as strong as before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And then this is a high quality, like, meme material right here. Minion damage support causes minions from supported skills to have 25% less life. So basically one of the main minion damaging support gems now has the downside of a quarter of your minion life is just gone.
Because reasons.
And wasn't minion damage support like 40% more damage? Like, it wasn't super high either, I don't
Let me
think.
just check. Let me just check what it. It's up to 49%.
Oh, okay, so it's fairly high, but still, that's...
Just use the woke version for it.
Yeah. This change provides more choice for builds that are supported by a variety of support gems and lessens the relative damage loss incurred by using a support gem that doesn't provide direct damage, like Chain or Ancestral Call. Well, Ancestral Call is basically required on strike skills unless you have really high-end gear that have the additional strike targets. And Chain does like 10% less damage, because I think they actually showed it. Yeah, 30% less damage per hit. So, like, the reason why I think people aren't using Chain is because the damage penalty is too high, not because...
Yeah.
Not necessarily because you can deal more damage, but... And also there's stuff on the tree that allows you to chain without the skill anyway, or support gem anyway.
Yeah.
Now there are now builds that benefit more by using far more interesting support gem setups that were previously balanced around only high damage support gems. A number of projectiles and bow supports like Barrage, Greater Multiple Projectiles, and Chain haven't been changed. So builds using more interesting projectiles will have lost much less damage than other builds. Well, I mean, I kind of agree with that, but I don't know. Split Arrow now does 10% more attack speed at all levels. Okay. And the funniest thing is that they actually buff traps. Like, out of all the nerfs that they're doing, like, traps are actually buffed by quite a bit, or at least the traps with charges. So I guess just play a trap build next league, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then they were saying that basically to compensate for the lack of damage from the support gems, they buffed some of the gems themselves to deal more damage, especially at level 20. So it sounds like you kind of need level 20 support. Level 20 skill gems themselves in order to deal good damage. So that 212 million XP is yes. And then they basically destroy Seismic Cry unless you need AoE, and then they buff like critical damage support and increase critical strikes like by a tiny bit. Actually, I guess it's a little bit substantial, but at the same time, they were supports that, for an example, increased critical damage support, it was like 105% or 110% critical strike multiplier. Like, the only reason why you would use that if you have no crit multiplier. And that's it. Otherwise, it was outclassed by other skill gems.
Yep.
And then, if you have awakened skill gems, you could deal as much as 50% more damage compared to having regular gems. The quality of the awakened support gems is now the same as the base support gem. So stuff like awakened melee physical damage no longer does intimidate, if that is what that means. So nice. How about you throw out your thoughts on that?
Well, the very fact that they're nerfing the awakened gems is just inherently stupid, because they're literally in the game as a higher end of gem. Like, they drop from Cirrus, and they're not a guaranteed drop, and the really good ones are really rare drops. So, like, nerfing those is really stupid, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Like the awakened brutality that reduced. Oh yeah, that's another good point. The brutality skill gem, if they made it so that the awakened version is the same as the regular version, you don't get the like 10% melee physical damage reduction from basically removing the physical damage reduction of enemies by 10%. So now that gem has significantly lost value.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the biggest reasons to get that, as well as the physical damage support for the Intimidate for basically free damage. So that's that's pretty dumb.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, they're really rare, and the higher end ones, I think Awakened Brutality was like 10 exalts minimum, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the top ones.
Yeah, so it's like now you're getting less benefit from these skill gems that are really rare, and they cost a ridiculous amount of currency unless you're really good. And in that case, you're probably going to get them by drops anyway. But but it just seems like such an unnecessary change. And then nerfing Archmage into the ground.
Yeah, whatever. I, I've played a mana stacking build and it was kind of whatever. So
But they lowered the damage based on the mana spent by 48%. That's nearly half. Like,
yeah,
I just. What?
yeah, like I really have no idea why they're totally gutting this. I mean, maybe there's people have made some ridiculous builds around this that I haven't seen, but
Right.
this just seems really dumb to me.
In my mind, I think the only reason to do Archmage now is if you use, like, Indigon with it in order to get yourself enough damage to make it
Yeah, pretty much.
usable
Like
now.
you basically have to use Indigon with Archmage now.
And then they changed some of the quality of the variety of support gems. Oh, I guess this is a level 1 chain support, so I guess I was wrong on the 30% less damage, but it's still like 10% less damage at level 20. So, I mean, I think it's the less damage is the reason why people don't use it more often rather than because they're.
It's 11% less damage at level 20.
Yeah. Is the main reason why people don't use it, as well as getting chain from other sources.
Right.
And what they stated here, like, it makes sense, but for an example, for like greater multiple projectiles, giving projectile damage instead of attack and cast speed, I would say attack and cast speed is more valuable than damage if you're gonna use that gem. But I don't know. Chain giving chain range instead of projectile speed, I think that was a good change.
Good chain. Okay.
Yes. So, for the most part, it's like they're nerfing all the support gems, but then buffing a lot of the base damage from the gems themselves. So, it's kind of a mixed bag, but there are definitely a select few gems like Archmage and Seismic Cry that they show here that they pretty much made them not really worth using. Like Seismic Cry, the main reason, as far as I know, that you would use that is because it dealt like 30% more damage up to a maximum of 4 stacks per hit. So you would get some like huge slam damage, but now it's only increased area of effect, so unless you're not stacking area of effect at all for some reason, it's just not really worth using.
Right.
And then we went over Archmage, so let's go over the biggest meat of this manifesto. I'll leave it over to you to talk about the flasks system rework.
So, flasks are way too OP and people don't like mashing their buttons, so now GGG thinks that they need to completely destroy them. Which, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. Now you don't want to press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at all whatsoever. So, yay, your hands will be feeling much nicer now.
Oh, but you still can't use macros. That's not allowed.
Yeah, no, that's not allowed. So the diamond flask is getting annihilated. It's being changed from your critical strikes are lucky to just a flat 100% increased critical strike chance instead.
Which is like 6% maximum.
Yeah.
Increased crit chance instead of up to like 25%. Or 30% is probably about the average you would get from a diamond flask.
Yeah. And for some reason that also warrants them nerfing Consecrated Ground, so that no longer gives an additional chance for enemies on it to be critically hit.
Oh, really? I didn't read that part.
Yeah, that's in the last sentence in that paragraph.
Oh. I didn't realize that. That's probably the dumbest change I've seen.
Yeah, like, okay, sure, whatever.
What about bottled faith then?
Yeah, I don't know. That's probably gonna just get completely deleted, like removed from the game. It's now legacy. I don't know.
So yeah, because bottled faith, the thing makes it so you have 2% base up to 2% base crit chance, and then like 10 up to 10% increased damage taken from two enemies.
Yeah.
And you used to also get, of course, the 100% crit chance or whatever.
Right.
Well, I think it would have been a much better change just to have the Diamond Flask do like 200% or 250%, and then have the Consecrated Ground be the same. If they had to nerf that, then reduce it to like 50% instead.
Yeah.
But completely removing it just doesn't make sense to me, because now Consecrated Ground is only for the life regen, and that's it, unless you have like some special bonus with it.
Yeah, which is really stupid.
And as far as I know, pretty much the only Sulphur Flask that's really worth using is Bottled Faith, unless there's some other unique one that I can't think of.
No, that's pretty much the only one actually worth using. I mean, unless you want to use life flasks with Sorrow of Divinity and your energy, but that's kind of silly. But whatever.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely worth noting that when a flask removes a curse, it no longer applies a period of immunity to curses, so basically the warding mod is completely useless now. And flasks that remove ailments only provide a period of immunity to that ailment if they actually remove the ailment. So if you are ignited and use a dowsing flask, you gain immunity to the ignite for a time. Well, the thing is that if I recall correctly, I think they actually showed like the duration of immunity, and they pretty much gutted that. Like normally it's like 4 seconds of immunity when you activate a flask, and I think on I'm not sure if they actually show it on here, but on the announcement page, but they made it so that removing ailments is only gives you like a 1 second immunity, so it's like
for a while now.
Okay. Here we go. It says Aquamarine Flask of Dowsing grants immunity to ignite for 1 second if used while ignited. Removes all burning when used. Like 1 second? Seriously? What? Why even bother?
Is that really what it says?
Yeah. Go to 30 minutes and 12 seconds on the announcement thing, and it shows an example. Well, it shows 4 examples, but yeah, the Aquamarine Flask of Dowsing grants immunity to ignite for 1 second if used while ignited and removes all burning. And then it is worth noting that they basically made the Basalt Flask like the most useless flask that I think I could that I could really think of. Except for maybe the Corundum Flask, like making it so you can't be stunned. Usually the Brine King Pantheon ability is going to be much better than this. I am not sure why you would use a flask specifically to remove stunning.
Yeah, like once you get stunned, even if you have like, even if you can't be stunned after that, usually if you get stunned once and you're like surrounded by monsters, you're gonna die unless you're like block with like recover on block or something like that.
Yeah, and have really high percentage of dodge or block.
Yeah.
And then they add the Gold Flask, which has a ridiculous amount of charges for some reason. Increases the rarity of items found by only 30%. Like that's useless to everyone other than Pathfinder.
Yeah, like it'll be that's actually really cool that they added that, I will admit, for
Yeah.
like magic finding. That's really cool, but otherwise it's whatever.
And it only lasts 3 seconds instead of 5, so...
Yeah.
But going on to the Basalt Flask, it now scales with armor instead of giving you a flat physical damage reduction. So it's literally useless to everyone unless you have a high amount of armor scaling already.
Which is stupid.
Yeah. And then they also put in here that they nerfed the... they nerfed the Iron Skin and Reflexes suffixes by... from 60 to 100% to now 40 to 60%. So, so in other words, sometimes I would use a Jade Flask with of Reflexes in order to gain a pretty decent amount of evasion, especially if I didn't have super high evasion already, but I had percent evasion on the tree. And maybe I would get like 10,000 evasion from the Jade Flask. Well, now it's like kind of debatable whether or not to even use one. The other thing worth noting is that they made the Adrenaline modifier basically like the most useless mod now. So
Yeah.
if you loved using the Adrenaline mod to get 20 to 30% movement speed, they nerfed it down to 6 to 8%. Supposedly promoting a Quicksilver Flask effect. But the problem is that it's like, yeah, but if I use a Quicksilver Flask, I get 40% on top of the already 20 to 30%. So
Yeah.
I'm already getting a huge benefit from using a Quicksilver Flask other than a different flask. So what is the point of this? It basically makes it so the Adrenaline mod is not worth using in the slightest. I might as well go with like attack speed or something.
Yeah.
I forget the accelerating mod. That's what it is. That does that. So with the flasks, they're making it so that they have two different currencies. They have instilling orbs and enkindling orbs to basically make it so that you have three different options. You can use a flask normally, which means you're going to have to use the flask piano anyway. The second way is to automatically use flasks under a certain condition, which basically means, hey, we have implemented the ability to use a macro without actually using a macro to activate your flask automatically.
Man.
yeah. And then the last one, Enkindling Orb, prevents utility flasks from gaining charges while active, but provides a huge boost to the effect duration or other ways it interacts with charges. So from their example in the announcement, it looks like you can make it so your flask actually lasts a good amount of time. So right here, 89% increased duration. So basically, instead of 5 seconds, you can get it up to around 10 seconds, and then maybe increase the effect of the flask. I'm not sure if you can get both those or not. But I mean, that actually sounds really good. So let's just say, I'm fighting a boss, but he's in his invincibility phase or something, like the, the Eradicator dude.
Oh, yeah.
With his invincibility invincibility phases. Like, let's say you have a flask that helps against shock, or I don't know, something to massively increase
shocks for it to work though.
Right. But some sort of flask that helps your survivability during an invincibility phase, you can use that for then. Or I guess a better example would be Chimera when he does the stupid smoke dashes.
Oh,
That are impossible to dodge. Like, let's just say you have something to increase your evasion or whatever during that time, and then you could use the increased duration on that and everything. Like, that sounds really nice, but the automatic flask also sounds nice. Like, I don't mind these, but at the same time, though, like, they could have just fixed it by making it so you can use multiple keys. You can use multiple flasks into one key. So let's just say you have 2 through 5 as your utility class. Why can't you just map all 2 through 5 onto one key? So then I only need to press 2 every 5 seconds instead of 2, 3, 4, 5 every 5 seconds.
That would be a way too OP and break the game.
And so, like, I really like that they're making it so that you have the option of making it so you can do automatic flash. But I do worry of, can you still activate it manually or not? We're gonna have to see. And also, they're reducing the amount of flash charges you get, so...
Yay.
Yeah. And then they also added increased flash duration on the skill tree, which sounds good. But the problem is that it's like, you're choosing that instead of a damaging node or some kind of defensive node. So it's like kind of hard to justify going all in on flash or go a good amount into flash when instead of something else. So if you're doing a Pathfinder, I think that would probably be a lot more useful, but if you're doing other classes, then it's kind of debatable. We'll just have to see.
Yeah.
So, player ailment mitigation. So basically they made it so flasks, like, arguably don't really do a whole lot to them. So that's great. And then the corrupted blood stacks, they reworked some of the Pantheon stuff. So poison deals more damage, which is great, but they nerf assassin, so good job. And they also nerfed Pathfinder a tiny bit, but not as hard as assassin for some reason. And then they made it so
you can speed on the assassin nodes.
Yeah, the assassin was basically nerfed into the ground, I think, last league because they took away like a huge amount of its quality of life and defenses for basically no reason. Yeah. So and they're making it so that you can see the effect of your ailment, so you can see like the effect of chalk and whatever, which is nice. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that, like, pretty much every time that Path of Exile adds a quality of life, it's to offset a huge nerf in some way, it feels like, so...
Yeah.
Trigger effects now cost mana, so you have a cast on crit assassin that does Cyclone, well, you're screwed. Good job. And they nerfed basically all of the dash mechanics, and Second Wind is now a borderline useless skill gem. Arcane Surge can now be applied to trigger effects, and they removed the mana regen based on percentage of mana for some reason. And then they nerfed Fortify, because why not?
Yep.
And then they buffed underperforming skills a little bit, depending on what they are and whatever. So that's the nitty-gritty parts of it. So going to the announcement stream. So I'm going to show right here, like, this is the graph that GGG used for the game balance, which, I mean, I kind of agree to some extent with for this, but I wouldn't say Harvest is way up here. I would say it's probably like right here instead, because what Harvest did was it allowed the casual players to actually build their own gear, whereas the super skilled players that were using Harvest, like, they could definitely get mirror items easier, but it still wasn't easy, and a lot of RNG was involved. So it's kind of one of those things where it was made easier, but not, I really don't think it was to that extent. But I don't know. But that's a graph that they used. So their comment about making Path of Exile more challenging. So we're going to play a little bit of this.
Monsters were dangerous and terrifying, able to kill a character in a few seconds of inattention. Players feared going into the ship graveyard cave because of the flicker strike ghosts. They were careful around rowers because a couple of unlucky charges could outright kill them. Trying to kill a Goatman Shaman while he had Molten Shell up was a pretty terrible idea. Nowadays, however, the game is a lot easier. We added level 2 and 4 support gems without increasing the difficulty of the game to compensate at all. Modern League mechanics shower the player in rare items from early levels, and we didn't make the game any harder in response. In fact, it's very interesting to compare the difficulty of League content with that of the base game.
Okay, well, I think all of that addresses the points that I wanted to make. So, they're saying that in the original of what they wanted Path of Exile to be, they wanted it challenging, which is fine to some extent. And they were talking about how most of the game hasn't really been changed too much, but then they add more options to the player to make the beginning of the game easier. And the League content was much more challenging than the base game, which I fully agree. Basically, the base game content was roughly half the difficulty, in my opinion, compared to the League mechanics a majority of the time. But the problem is that what they're talking about here, like the Flicker Strike Cave, for an example, like they're talking about, oh, players feared this because they would get comboed like that. Or against Roa, it's like one ram, if you had low life and low maximum life, you would get one-shotted. But I have to question, how is that fun for the player? How is it fun to deal with enemies that teleport to you, and you're super slow already at the beginning of the game, and there really isn't a lot of options to avoid that other than killing them before they kill you. So I really have to question how that design philosophy of getting easily comboed or one-shotted like that is a fun game mechanic. And that's a big problem that I have with some of the endgame, is that, with certain mods, especially damaging mods, you get one-shotted by, like, any rare monster with some sort of aura.
Yep.
You know, with, like, 5k-ish effective life pool, or even sometimes higher than that. And it makes the game really frustrating, rather than fun. Like, if I was going for... Well, how should I say this? If I wanted to do harder content, I would do stuff like Delirium. I would do stuff like Awakener 8 Series. I would do Uber Elder and all of the really endgame content. Like, I thought that Delirium, that was the whole point of that, to make it so that the game was hard for the people who wanted it harder, instead of making the entire game harder for all the people who don't want that level of difficulty. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's like there's a hardcore mode for people,
Yeah,
for people that want the game to be harder, that basically want to make it more challenging for themselves. There's a solo self-found mode where you can't trade with other players. Everything you find is what you have to use. Like, they don't need to make the entire game more difficult for everyone just for the sake of making it more difficult. That they should certainly add more options for difficulty if that's what they really think the game needs. They don't need to force it on everyone.
yeah, and I wanted to also talk about for the different things as well, is that for the Path of Exile to level 100 series that we kind of benched like a year ago again.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems that we had, especially with, at the time anyway, we weren't super good players at the time. I think you have definitely gotten better, whereas I have kind of been the same, if not worse, because I haven't been playing. But one of the biggest things that really sucked away our enjoyment of the game was that 10% XP penalty from dying. And the problem is that Path of Exile has a lot of things that converge together to make your character die. So, for an example, the poor looting system. I mean, they said in the thing that, oh, well, these League mechanics, they shower people with rares and blah, blah, blah from even earlier game. Well, the problem is, a majority of those rare items are completely useless to you, even if they're for your character. Let alone if they're for an entirely different defense class, whatever. So that hasn't really compensated too much for the difficulty of the game, especially in the end game, when it arguably should be better with the amount of monsters that they are. So the looting system, as well as the map mod system, having a lot of damage mods, like, pretty much guarantees that you get one shot regardless of your your defenses, unless you have, like, max dodge and max block with high evasion, for an example. And then ailments. They're making it so you can no longer be immune to ailments. Well, a big problem with the game, and basically what made Flask required, is that you would get so much power from them, and defenses from them, as well as ailment immunity, that you were forced to use them. That's why we had the Flask piano, was that we would activate our Flask to be immune to curses, immune to freezing, and immune to bleeding, as well as having one or two that added to our damage. So that's why we use that, not because, oh, well, it's just an optional thing that we would like to have rather than being forced to. We were kind of forced to, because if you get frozen, you just instantly die. If you are bleeding, if you don't have physical damage reduction, you would just die.
Which is, like, impossible to get physical or damage reduction.
Yeah.
Like,
and then
damage reduction, not stupid armor trash. Armor does nothing.
Yeah, armor doesn't even do anything against bleeding or corrupted blood, as far as I know anyway, so... So that was kind of the thing where... So, instead of making it so that there are more options to mitigate these ailments, so we didn't need ailment immunity all the time, they made it so that the enemies are harder, so now we're forced to use those. So, I think they're just really going backwards on this. Like, I'm fine with them reducing the power creep. I kind of agree with that. But the problem is that they're reducing the power creep and making everything else harder when there already are harder options if you want them. And if they didn't have the 10% XP penalty, I would probably enjoy this game so much more. And probably would have played at least one of the leagues that I skipped. So last league, with their nerfs to, like, the higher end stuff, they pretty much ruined, like, my goals to go after. But now they're basically just ruining, like, the entire game for me. With trying to make it harder than it should be, in my opinion. Like, if you want to do league mechanic stuff in early game, if you have a good enough build, then you're rewarded with that. As long as you don't spend too much time doing it. Whoops. Because obviously going through the campaign is always a joy and time sink for that. So it just feels like they're really going about this not necessarily the right way. I think a lot of the things that they're doing, like for the skill gems themselves, we would really have to see how much this affects certain builds and stuff. But the Flask rework system, especially for the ailment immunity as well as some of these other things, they pretty much ruined Flasks. Or at least they made it so that they are reduced in effect, but then they made everything else harder, so then it doesn't really make sense. Like, if they did all of these nerfs but made the rest of the game stay the same, I probably would have been fine with that, but since they're doing that as well as wanting to buff everything else, that is where I have a bigger problem. And then they also nerfed into the ground. Well, I shouldn't say nerfed into the ground, but they heavily nerfed a lot of the movement skills. So basically, the majority of the skills that you would use to dodge damage is not as reliable anymore. But yeah, I just think that there is a lot of things, especially in game, like there are so many enemies on screen at one time. It's really hard to even find out what you're getting damaged by.
Yeah.
So I think if Path of Exile was a different type of game, making it harder would be fine, but the problem is that they're trying to make it harder in a genre, well, I shouldn't say genre, but with their current systems, it doesn't really work that well, because it's really hard to know what is damaging you and like what is your character having problems with, because I mean it's really easy to get one shot by stuff that's not even on screen, for an example.
Yep.
So I don't know.
Or one shot by on Death Effects.
Yeah, on Death Effects. Yeah. And they pretty much push that every leak. Oh, well, our players are doing so much damage that they're not being affected by their attacks, so let's add on death effects that don't even affect those players because they're moving too fast.
Yes. Makes perfect sense.
So, do you have any more things to mention on top of what I said?
No, nothing more to mention other than the patch notes tomorrow should be very interesting.
Just have a note right there. All player damage has been reduced by 40%.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I guess if you wanted Path of Exile to be harder, this is definitely the league for you. So go play solo self-found hardcore with all the delirious mods that you want.
Yes.
On your rare tier 16 corrupt map. But for a more casual player like me, this is definitely, in my opinion, the wrong direction that I think in the last discussion, like I talked about how if they kept going in the direction that they were going, that I would pretty much just stop playing Path of Exile altogether and never think about coming back to it. And with this manifesto, they've definitely reinforced this idea. That, I mean, if you're a super hardcore Path of Exile player, you're probably not really going to be affected by most of these anyway. Other than, like, the flask ailment immunity garbage, but besides that, you're probably not really going to be affected by it. But for players like me, that I liked the option of having higher difficulty if I wanted it, rather than it being forced on me. This definitely is a slap to the face, easily. Yep. And if I were to play Path of Exile at any time, it pretty much also reinforces the idea of, if for me to have fun with this game, I pretty much have to have an aura bot support now. Mm-hmm. Like, even more so than before. Because I think we kind of talked about before that with the amount of randomness and difficulty there are in endgame of stuff, you know, dealing damage to you without you noticing it because of how many monsters there are and everything. In order to have fun playing the builds that we want to play, we pretty much had to have an aura bot in order to gain enough survivability in order to play the build that we actually wanted to play.
Yeah.
And now that's definitely reinforced. And if I were to continue playing this game, to go back to it, I'm pretty much looking at building bots that support other people rather than me actually playing something to kill monsters now. Like, a curse bot, a mana stacking energy shield guardian bot, and things like that, and then making it so that other people can enjoy the game, whereas I'm not really doing anything. So one thing to mention, even though that this patch has definitely brought about a lot of negativity for us personally, I would like to mention at some point that the league mechanic itself does look pretty fun, if you ask me. It's like a combination of Heist without the annoyances of Heist and Abyss. So I think they definitely did a good job with that. Unfortunately, they added so that certain monsters have immunity to types of damage, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I thought they were trying to move away from that a bunch of patches ago, but apparently not. And then, on top of that, all of the skill gems that they have added, they do look really cool. And it would be really interesting to try those, but my motivation to actually try them, with all the stuff that they mentioned here, is pretty much zero.
Mhm.
And again, I think I mentioned in the last patch my thoughts on... I was really hyped for Path of Exile 2 when they announced it and showed the next trailer. But with this, if this is the direction they're going with this game, why should I play Path of Exile 2 when it's just going to be an extension of this game? Like, again, if you play Path of Exile a lot, you're probably not going to be affected by these, really. But for someone like me that's more casual, why should I play this over Diablo 3? That's probably more learnable easily at this point. If I were to get into that, or if I wanted to play Grim Dawn, or if I wanted to even play like MMOs like Guild Wars 2, I mean, sure, they don't have the variety that Path of Exile has, but at least I'm not constantly dying and being frustrated that from losing XP and whatnot. So that's... I think that kind of wraps up my thoughts on the whole deal. Anything to add?
No, I think that that about covers it.
So I think with this, I'm probably not going to make a video about like the specific balance notes that are coming out later, but I just wanted to throw out my thoughts on there that the direction they're going, hey, if you want a more challenging game, you're probably ecstatic about this. But for players like me that were already annoyed at, to some extent, of the difficulty, especially in higher end parts of the game, like red maps with high amount of damaging mods and whatnot, it really pushes out like all of the casuals for playing this game, in my opinion. So,
Yeah.
and at this point, I would rather play something else if that's what they're doing. So, with that, that's our ramblings of the next patch. So, thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.